Okay, what is your full name?
Juanita Paris Vaughn.
Why'd your parents name you Juanita?
Well, they probably couldn't think of another name and probably didn't know that was Mexican then.
Did you have a nickname?
No.
So when and where were you born?
Coleman, Alabama, May 22nd, 38.
How'd your family come to live in this area?
My mom and dad, well, my mom grew up a few miles from here, but Dad grew up on the farm that we later owned, and that's how it was back then. You lived where your dad and mom grew up.
So, tell me about the house that you grew up in. Like, how many rooms did it have? Or did it have bathrooms, electricity, and all that?
Well, when I was born, Mom and Dad lived in a log cabin on the place. I think we had maybe 100 acres. I can't remember for sure. And we lived in a log cabin with 2 bedrooms, and then Daddy built a house, and it had a living room, a dining room, and a kitchen, a back porch, and 2 bedrooms. That's it.
Is there any special items in the house that you remember? Anything comes to mind?
Remember, my mother later in life had a big freezer that went across one complete wall in the kitchen. And I remember in my early years, we had a wooden cook stove, and we heated the house with wood. That was before we had electricity. I think we must have gotten electricity in this area maybe in about 42.
What was your earliest childhood memory?
Going to Chattanooga with my grandmother on the bus.
Tell me about that.
Well, it was just a real experience. Our grandmother lived down below us, and she was wonderful. And I must not have been in school then, and she took me to Chattanooga to visit one of her older sons, and it was just a real trip. First time I'd been on a bus. I was probably 4 years old.
Now, what did you guys do for fun?
Oh my gosh, my dad and mom were younger, and they always played games with us, and we worked hard. We thought we worked too hard then, but we realized after we got grown that we had a lot better growing up than almost anybody I know. We lived on the farm. We had our own beef. We had our own pork. We had our own chickens. Daddy raised a lot of crops, and Mama canned a lot, and we had a lot of food. We always had a lot of food that Mom and Dad helped other people out with. And I remember Mama's family lived in Birmingham, and we were not well off, but they were. But boy, when our vegetables came in here, they would come on Sunday. I don't know how my mother ever fixed lunch for like 30 more people after church, but she always did. And they would leave, and when you left our house on the main road, there was a bridge there. And their car would be almost hitting the bridge from their trunk being loaded with vegetables my dad had grown. Of course, they had nicer clothes than we did and everything. Never did a thing for my mother and father.
Did you have family chores, and what did you have to do?
Oh my gosh. Dad had a couple of tenant houses, and the girls, used to have to hoe cotton and pick cotton, and I love to pick cotton and pick vegetables. But mainly the boys, it came to the time when the boys worked in the fields, and we helped Mama cook lunch for the people.
Did you have an allowance, or how'd you make money, and what'd you do with it?
We milked 4 cows and got a dime. And Daddy was smart. He figured out when we learned how to milk, we didn't get the dime anymore. We milked the cows.
What'd you spend it on?
Well, Sunday afternoon, our friends and I had all friends that were in the neighborhood here. And our treat was, after church, we could walk to the store on Sunday afternoon. So we would walk to the store. This is before any of us could drive or anything. We'd walk to the store, and then you could buy a moon pie and a Coke for a dime. And that was our treat. And we never had to work on Saturdays. We always had Saturdays that Daddy would take us to the creek down on his property swimming, or we'd go to somebody else's house swimming in the creeks. And if you said you couldn't swim, Daddy'd throw you in. He is always there to rescue you, but you kind of figured he wouldn't. So that's how we all learned to swim.
Okay, we're back, and what was school like, and what were your best and worst subjects?
School, the school was over on the Eva Road, and it was called Providence, and my aunt never had any children, and she worked for a lady at a clothing store in Cullman. And Janie and I weren't getting a very good education, so she took us to live with her, and we went to city schools. I think Janie must have been in 5th grade, maybe 4th or 5th, and I was in 2nd or 3rd, something like that. So we had a good education. We had lived down there in the school months, and Daddy furnished all their vegetables and everything for us living there, and then we would come home in the summer and help out at home. The other kids didn't have that advantage, but it really helped us a lot out. We got a lot better schooling, but by the time the others came along, our schools were better here.
As you were growing up, do you remember any fads, favorite music, popular hairstyles, clothes?
Let's see. Mother sewed most of our dresses. That's how and she sewed a lot of the boys' shirts. And Daddy always would go shopping for Mom and bring her the prettiest things, the prettiest dresses. And Dad would go buy all the groceries and everything because there's so many kids at home. And Mom and Daddy always had somebody else living with them, a son that somebody had thrown out and didn't have a place, or an alcoholic brother-in-law of Mama's who didn't drink at our house, and he helped Mama a lot. He had been in the Merchant Marines, and he stayed with us a lot, slept on the couch, and he helped Mama with a lot of the cooking and everything, and he wouldn't drink when he was at our house. Daddy didn't allow him to then. But we had younger parents. We always played games. Mom and Daddy played cards a lot with friends. And our parents were very smart, and I look back and I don't know how they got that much knowledge. We didn't have the libraries then we have today.
Mm-hmm. Well, did you go to church?
We went to church all the time. And later, when Janie and I were old enough to date, if the boy didn't go to church with us on Sunday night, we couldn't go out with him.
How often did you go to church?
We went to church Sunday morning, Sunday night, and Wednesday night.
And when you were growing up, were there any world events or things in America that stand out in your mind, and did they affect your family at all?
We didn't even have a radio when I was real little, and a man named Mr. Ray, which was one of the neighbors about a mile away, had a radio. And I remember it must have been World War II. Would it have been World War II? I think it would have been World War II. And Daddy would go over at night, all the men in the community would go over to this Mr. Ray's house and listen to the news of the war. And it must have been World War II. I've forgotten what year that was. But anyhow, I remember that Mom and Daddy, everybody blacked out their windows so that there would be no lights in case they were coming to bomb the houses. And there were pallets made in Mom and Dad's bedroom, and all the children at that time slept on pallets in their bedroom.
Well, can you think of a time like when you were in school? Did you have any school activities or sports that you participate in?
Not until I got in junior high school, and then I was a cheerleader. But no other sports. Now the boys did, but the girls didn't at that point. They didn't have sports for girls at that time.
What about did you do cheerleading in high school?
Junior high school.
Were you or your other family members ever mentioned in the newspaper?
Yeah, I won. I was a cheerleader, and then I won a county-wide oratorical contest when I started into high school. I believe it might have been the last year in middle school. And that was really kind of about the only thing I ever did.
So, when you were growing up, did you guys eat together, and what was that like?
We ate together, and we always ate together, and Daddy always said, if any of you kids don't like what your mama's cooked, you don't have to eat it, but you better not ever say anything about your mama's cooking.
Okay. Do you have any special family traditions?
Well, we went to church. We were always as close a family as we could be. We had family reunions every year, and a lot of Daddy's people and Mama's people would come, but I really don't remember any family traditions except like on Sunday afternoon you went visiting maybe family members, that lived close, but I don't remember anything. Now when Janie and I were in high school, Daddy grew a lot of watermelons, and he'd let us have a watermelon cutting every year, and there would be like 100, 150 people. And I can remember Mama'd be on the back porch with a coat sleeve with soot and tell them they was going to see stars, and they'd be lined up all around the house, and nobody ever misbehaved. They knew.
Now, what are you talking about? A soap sleeve? What are you talking about?
What do you mean?
You had a watermelon cut.
We had a big party. Daddy would allow us at the end of the season to have a big party. That was when Janie and I were in high school. And we'd call it a watermelon cutting. And every kid in the community and everybody we knew would come. We'd have like 100, 150 people. And Mom and Daddy would be right active with everybody. And nobody ever misbehaved. They knew that Daddy didn't allow it. Now later, when the other kids were coming up, Daddy had a stroke. And it affected his back really bad. And he wore a brace, and he could hardly sit in church. And I think that's when a lot of Daddy drank a lot.
Who's the oldest relative that you remember, and what do you remember about them?
I guess that would have been my Daddy's mother. Daddy's dad died, and the grandmother lived right down below us, and I used to spend a lot of time with her. Now, she lived to be in her 90s, and she was a great, great person. But now Mama's mother and Daddy both died with cancer. Mama's mother had throat cancer, and that must have been when I was like 8 years old or 9 or something like that. And then her daddy came to live with us, and he died with cancer probably, must have been, 1938. Must have been about 45 or 48 when he died.
What stories come to mind when you think about your grandparents and your parents?
My grandparents' parents?
Or your grandparents or your parents?
What stories come to mind? Well, I stayed with my grandmother a lot because she lived by herself, and I remember I'd go to her house, and she'd always have a flour sack full of tea cakes. But she'd always have in the cupboard cups of herbal tea that was still warm that she had made, and she'd say, "You look very peaked, you need some of this tea." Well, we knew that we wouldn't get any cookies if we didn't drink the tea. So, and for years and years I couldn't drink hot tea.
Okay.
But I don't remember really much at all about my mother's parents, except when Mama's daddy lived with us. I barely remember her mother at all, but when Mama's daddy lived with us, he was sick, and all the cousins were there. It was one Sunday afternoon, and Daddy gave us all a dime, and he said, "All you kids," there's probably 10 or 15 of us, "walk to the store and just lollygag around. You can be all afternoon doing it." Well, what we didn't know then that he was dying. And we got back to the bridge down below Mom and Daddy's house, and all of a sudden an angel came out of the woods on one side, and all of us just stopped and stood still. And that angel went all across that road. You couldn't see the face. And it got in the woods on the other side, and all of us just broke out running over each other to get up that hill to get home. And when we got to the house, I remember we were all out of breath, and Daddy came out on the porch, and he said, "Your granddaddy's just died." But it's so funny that I have such a vivid memory of that, and none of the other cousins can seem to remember that. They don't remember running, and they don't remember it happening, but it definitely happened.
Are there any special heirlooms, photos, Bibles, or other memorabilia that it's passed down in your family?
There are Bibles, and there's a lot of pictures, but we didn't have a whole lot of material things. That was pretty much all there was.
When and how did you meet your spouse, and where and when did you get married?
Well, Bob was in the Navy, and Daddy's first cousin was married to, Daddy's first cousin was married to Bob's brother, and they always came to our house on the 4th of July for a big party. The 4th of July was always 4th of July at our house, always growing up. And a lot of Daddy's people came. And Bob used to come and hunt with my father on our place with his brother, but I can barely remember him coming. But anyhow, he was in the Navy, so Bob's first cousin, who was Pauline, who was married to Bob's brother, called and wanted Janie to go out with Bob. He was home from the Navy and didn't have a girlfriend, so Janie didn't go. She had a boyfriend. She wouldn't date anybody but the man, Arlen, that she married. And she said, well, it is Juanita free. Well, I had a date, but we were a little bit feisty then, so I decided it'd be more fun to go with him. So that was the first time I met Bob.
How would you describe your spouse, and what do you admire most about him?
I am married to probably the best man that probably ever was. One reason for putting up with me. But he's just a good, very smart person. Loved by all the girls, the niece that we helped raise, Alicia and Melanie and Melissa, and Ashley, or the granddaughter. They literally think that Bob hung the moon.
Why and how did you choose your children's names?
An aunt helped name Melissa, and I thought it would be neat to have the both girls' name starts with an M, so we figured out Melanie, and then if we'd had another one, we would have named her Melinda.
What's your proudest moment as a parent?
I guess maybe when the girls graduated from high school, from college, was probably, we were always proud of the girls. We were proud of everything they did. They were good girls. But I guess probably when they graduated from college was the best. We never let our kids think for a minute that they weren't going to college. It was never talked about. It was talked about a positive thing that they were going, and that was it. Bob was the first in his family to ever graduate from college.
Of all the things you've learned from your parents, what do you feel was the most valuable?
The way they raised the kids, the way they treated them, the fact that they were young enough to have fun with them, and they just had so many good things to say. Like my mother would always say, a kid's not stubborn, he's independent. And every child is different. And my dad would always say, there's nobody any better than you. Doesn't matter who they are. And you're as good as anybody. And he said another thing, everybody has the same amount of minutes and hours in the day. Everybody's time is as valuable as the next person. It doesn't matter what position they hold. That kind of stuck out with me.
And what accomplishments are you most proud of?
Well, I guess my family and my girls and my niece that is like a daughter to us, and their families and the grandchildren. Not real proud of the adopted boys, but that's another story. They had a hard life. And we've done everything we could to make them what we thought they ought to be. And we'll get there. We've got there with one, so we probably will another. That's a big disappointment.
What is the one thing you want people to remember about you?
That I was good to people.
Very nice. Thank you.